Hi, everybody. Today is Saturday, July 18, 2026, and our dear friend Professor Marandi is here with us. Welcome back, Professor.
Hi, Nima. Thank you very much for having me again. It's always a great pleasure.
Yeah. Let me start with what is going on in the last 48 hours, 24 hours. What was happening? The United States was basically focusing on the city of Bandar Abbas, and they struck the exit and entrance of a tunnel, which is so important, one of the most important tunnels. They hit both sides in order to make some sort of problem for the tunnel. And the footage that came out today, it shows that the Iranians have already started and they're opening the tunnel. And the other point for them was the bridges. They're trying to isolate the strategy is to isolate the city of Bandar Abbas, which they know everyone knows that is of particular importance strategically for Iranian naval program or Iranian naval base in the southern part of Iran. And the other attacks in Iran where one of them was a Imam Ali missile base in Khorramabad, which is in the western part of Iran, and the maritime control tower in Larak Island in the southern again, which was the photo was shared by the Secretary of State, by the Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. And the other one was the desalination plant. It was in the south of Iran. The United States hit that desalination plant, and we've heard some explosions in Bushehr, Darab, Khark, and Ahvaz in the western part of Iran. And in response, what was happening last night, Iran was somehow devastating the Iraqi Kurdistan. Looking at the mountain, it was all on fire. Everything was burning. Even you see the footages, you see the secondary explosions happening. I showed that to my audience last night. I did a video on that. And it means that they're hitting the ammunition depots in Iraqi Kurdistan. That was one of the. And today, as we talk, there are missiles. Here you see the sky in Jordan. You see at least 8, 9 missiles in Jordan, and they hit some targets there, and everything is burning there in Jordan. There are some reports in Kuwait as well, as you see here. This that some areas, American bases or some military areas, are burning in Kuwait. And Iran started for the first time to send some sort of warning to the United States and to the Kuwaiti government by hitting some targets, the desalination plant and power plant in Kuwait. This is what was happening so far. What is your understanding of the current phase of the war?
Oh, the areas that surround Bandar Abbas, the port of Bandar Abbas, these are all civilian sites that they bombed. Ordinary bridges, tunnels, and everyone who was killed, every single person who was killed were locals, and they targeted them on purpose. They saw cars crossing the bridge. They bombed the bridge while the car was crossing. So they wiped out a family. A man was a truck driver was uh, passing across the bridge. They bombed him. So the American pilots or American those who are firing the missiles, they're seeking to kill ordinary people as they launch these attacks. And the way in which and except for the Imam Ali missile site, most of the sites that they've struck were civilian targets, and they just don't have any capability of creating significant damage to Iran's military because Iran's military is well protected, as we've discussed many times before. The uh, the control tower for that Hegseth showed was a civilian tower that was had nothing to do with the military. But these people just like destroying out of spite. They want to hurt Iran. They want to hurt the Iranian people. They want to demoralize the Iranian people. They've struck desalination plants. And the reason why Iran, after a lot of patience, has now begun to strike desalination plants in Kuwait is for two reasons. One is Kuwait has been most of the strikes, the country that is most complicit right now in the attacks on Iran is Kuwait. They're giving the most assistance to the United States, and there's a huge U.S. presence there, and and there's a large U.S. force there that is stationed there for a potential ground attack at some point. So one is because of what the role that Kuwait is playing. The second is because they've been targeting desalination plants, they've been targeting hospitals, they've been targeting children's hospitals, they've been targeting bridges and tunnels, all civilian, all the cars that you see stuck, they belong to ordinary people, people who work in factories going back home, people who are taking their kids to a hospital in another city. These are the victims of U.S. aggression. So, what based on what we're hearing from the Iranians, the Iranians are going to begin hitting harder, and I think increasingly they're going to start targeting critical infrastructure because the Americans are striking Iranian critical infrastructure, and the Iranians want to make sure that they don't get away with it. So we have to remember, Iran did not start the war. Iran did not restart the war. Iran did not initiate escalation. But Iran has said many times, and I said this during the 40 days, of war, the Ramadan war. I'm sure you recall, I repeatedly said that these countries, if this war escalates, these countries will be destroyed. These are tiny countries, they're deserts. Saudi Arabia is large, but it is also mostly desert. All of their key assets are right in front of Iran. It doesn't even, someone was saying they want to build pipelines. I mean, first of all, if they build pipelines, it'll take years. But the assets are here. They're still right in front of Iran. In other words, if they build pipelines through Syria or through Saudi Arabia to the Red Sea, all Iran has to do is target their critical infrastructure alongside the Persian Gulf. So they have to learn to live like normal countries. There's no solution for them to continue being U.S. proxies and allow the United States to use their land to kill Iranians, to use their airspace to murder Iranians, to destroy the country, to target desalination plants as they've done again last night in Iran. So I think within the next 2 or 3 days, we're going to see the Iranians hit harder and make it more painful for the United States and for those regimes that host their forces. We're entering the critical phase now. Iran is hitting the Americans very hard. It's been doing so for the last 6-7 days. Iranian missiles are very precise, more precise than they were in the past. They have excellent intelligence, and the Americans have given significant casualties, even though they're hiding them. But the casualties are high based on reports that the Iranians are getting on the ground in these countries. A lot of people apparently in these different countries are cooperating with Iran. In Syria, in Jordan, of course, in Iraq, in Kuwait, and elsewhere, Iran is getting lots of information. So, but this, so the Iranians are hitting hard, and that's why the United States is increasingly targeting civilian targets again, as we saw during the previous war. But this time, I think the Iranians are not going to show the sort of patience that they did during the 40-day Ramadan war.
The war is somehow expanding. As you mentioned, there is no country right now in the Gulf and outside of the Persian Gulf that was not hit by Iranian missiles. Saudi Arabia was hit, Oman was hit, Jordan is getting hit over and over the bases. We've seen some attacks in Syria attacking special forces, American special forces, at least their base in Syria was attacked by Iranians, which was some sort of sign, it seems to me, that they're going to hit. And we had the Iranian military advisor to the supreme leader of Iran saying the next phase is going to be offensive. They're going to go on offensive. It doesn't matter the political borders, doesn't matter as long as they're hosting American forces and their weapons, and those weapons are they're using against Iran. That's why they're going to attack. And this is the next phase. And do you think are we getting so close to that sort of all out war between the two sides, which finally it seems that it's getting worse because, as you've mentioned, desalination plants, power plants and energy facilities, it's going to be part of the new phase of the war.
Well, last night, General Mohsen Rezai, the leader's military advisor, came on television and had an interview with one of the
IRIB.
reporters.
Yeah.
Yeah, with one of the journalists in Iranian state radio and television, and he basically said that we are moving to a new phase, and that Iran is going to be hitting much harder. And from what I'm also hearing is that the escalation, the Red Sea, in the Red Sea, there's going to be escalation, and or at least in that region in general. And also in Iraq, there is a very large resistance force. The resistance force in Iraq is something that many people don't really um, appreciate how powerful and big it is. It is larger, significantly larger than Hezbollah. And of course, they have much better access to resources and weapons than Hezbollah because Hezbollah is surrounded by US proxies, Al Qaeda in Syria, and the president and prime minister in Lebanon, and of course the Israeli regime. They've all surrounded Hezbollah. So getting weapons to Hezbollah is very difficult, as you've probably seen. Some weapons were to Hezbollah were intercepted by the Al Qaeda regime in Syria, and they displayed it for the public as if it's something to be proud of, doing the Israeli regime's dirty work for them. Again, this just every day we get this reminder that those people who supported the dirty war in Syria, they basically supported Israel, and they empowered Israel. And the Erdogan regime in Turkey has done more to help Israel than any other country in our region, due to his destruction of the country, bringing about the destruction of the country. But in any case, the Iraqi resistance is much better armed and has much better access to arms than does Hezbollah even, or Ansarullah for that matter. And we saw the funeral in the holy cities of Najaf and Karbala, the many millions of people who participated in, like, I don't know, 50 degrees Celsius heat. So this is the reality on the ground, that right now the United States is fighting Iran for a week, not getting anywhere. I mean, if they think that they can, that because the bombing campaign against Iran seems to indicate that they want to carry out a land offensive. The pattern is that of an army that is preparing the grounds for a land offensive. But the Iranians are prepared for a land offensive. They've been preparing themselves for war with the United States for decades. You know, we've discussed this on numerous occasions in the past. That's why Iran has these underground missile bases and drone bases and factories, because they knew that when the day comes, the Americans, if they're not well protected, the Americans will destroy all of them. So Iran's preparations for a land offensive take all these things into consideration. Iranian assets are deep, well protected, deep underground. Iran does not have any storage rooms for drones and missiles on the ground. They're all well protected. If they need to fire anything, they'll take it out of their the protected area, or some of their weapons are spread out so that the Americans would not be able to uh, destroy them in a meaningful way. So, um, as we speak, after a week of fighting, the Americans have not had any success. If they carry out a ground offensive, the Iranians are waiting for them. They'll let them take some territory, and then they'll just keep pounding them from everywhere. And in this weather, to me, it sounds insane for the Americans to carry out such an attack. But the Iranians are prepared. I mean, and the Americans have so far seen no success. And the devastation that we're seeing in Jordan, in Kuwait, in Bahrain, and in all the other countries, including Oman now, because of their foolishness in accepting U.S. demands under duress and assisting the United States, although it was under duress, but it has now put them on the list too, because Iran is not going to allow the territory of any of these countries to be used against it. So the United States has failed so far, but Iran has not expanded its missile strikes. It has not expanded its target list to include critical infrastructure. And Iran's allies have so far been relatively quiet. And they've been preparing themselves just as Iran has.
The assessment is that the United States is mostly using Jordan to attack Iran. You've mentioned Kuwait, but out of putting the Kuwait aside, which country is participating and cooperating with the United States the most after Kuwait?
I'm not quite sure, but obviously Jordan is playing a very important role. But all of them are involved. I mean, Saudi Arabia's airspace and air bases are used by the Americans for attacking Iran. But so far, the Iranians have showed restraint towards Saudi Arabia, but that won't last long anymore. I think we're coming to the end of Iran's patience. I think that I know that none of them have refrained from cooperating with the United States. But I think there are multiple issues that Iran takes into account when it starts striking the American bases. But Kuwait has played an exceptionally dark role, and so has Bahrain. Of course, the U.S. base in Bahrain is huge. It's extraordinarily large. I've never seen it myself, but Iranians that I've spoken to say that it's a huge base, and that what the Iranians are doing is they're destroying all of the assets that the United States have brought to the region that they could use if they want to initiate a ground offensive. So all of the Iranian missiles and drones are carefully, all of the missile and drone attacks are carefully designed to destroy piece after piece of the U.S. war machine.
Yeah. Here is the new statement by IRGC just moments ago. After several days of fighting against our armed forces and receiving crushing responses to Trump's aggression, and realizing that the Iranian armed forces had become much stronger than the first day of the war, instead of honorably accepting defeat and admitting to his repeated miscalculations, he took a new approach by fleeing the battlefield and attempted to hide his defeat in the military confrontations by committing war crimes. The United States tried to mend its position by carrying out destructive attacks on hospitals, bridges, railways, airports, ports, telecommunications centers, and so on, killing civilians instead of fighting on the battlefield like real men. Since there is no international institution to prevent these barbarities of the US military, there is no other way than to implement the Quranic command. So whoever attacks you, attack him in the same way that he attacks you. This is the this statement, and I think it means that in the coming days there would be huge escalation. I don't know what is the plan on the part of Donald Trump and how long does it take for him to understand the complexity of the region and the situation he's in. We had I the announcement of the ceasefire before all of this madness happening. I thought that they're understanding, they're getting to the point to understand, but it doesn't seem there is no point right now to understand that if Donald Trump gets the complexity of the issue in the region.
Yes, but we discussed this many times before. The Iranians always believed that the chances for the war reigniting were high, and the chances that the United States would abide by the MOU were very low. I mean, the Iranians were willing to sit back and give it a chance, especially since they were very smart and they used the MOU to quickly export huge amounts of oil, which they had in tankers that were stuck in the Persian Gulf. So they made a lot of money and they imported a lot of supplies, critical supplies for the country for the weeks and months ahead. So, but in any case, they were very skeptical, and they were preparing ever since. Right now, I mean, for a long time now, the armed forces are focused on uh, enhancing missile and drone capabilities, and they're producing huge numbers of different types of missiles and different types of drones and expanding the underground bases. The focus for the armed forces is now on this, both the Revolutionary Guards and the army, and it's bearing fruit. The Iranians have huge quantities of all types of missiles and drones, and it can go on like this for a very, very long time. But since the United States is insisting on carrying out war crimes and striking hospitals and desalination plants and murdering civilians and bombing bridges and bombing tunnels, the Iranians are saying enough is enough. So, based on the Quranic verse, this is retaliation. In other words, the Iranians don't want to do this. They didn't start it. They waited a long time, just like they didn't start the war. I know a lot of people are saying Iran should put aside morality. I mean, the difference between us and them is morality. And so we would never put aside morality. But since the international community will do nothing except support this aggression and the war crimes, the Iranians, after patience, waiting a long time, they are now going to begin to retaliate. And the limited strikes on Kuwait are the warning shots that if you continue down this path, you're going to pay heavily for this, and you'll be hurt much more than we were. If we go back to the 40-day war, the Ramadan war, when the Americans and the Israelis began striking Iran's critical infrastructure, one of the key places that they hit was the South Pars gas field. And then Iran hit back very hard at Qatar and I think the Emirates and Kuwait. But the strike on Qatar was the most devastating. And that caused Trump to put out a statement saying, this won't happen again. So this retaliation or this threat to retaliation is basically a means to force Americans to discontinue targeting ordinary people. I mean, the Americans are really, I mean, this is Iran's deterrence because the West will support the genocide. They support the genocide in Gaza, the collective West, all the European countries, the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all of them support the genocide in Gaza, which is ongoing, by the way. We shouldn't forget. They just bombed a funeral among the many other crimes over the past couple of days. One was bombing a funeral, killing 9 people, I think, at that funeral. So when they support genocide and when they support the genocide in southern Lebanon, then Iran cannot have any hope in Western countries putting pressure on the United States to end this. They would support it. NATO supports it. Not a single country in NATO condemns it. You don't even see Turkey condemning the United States. I mean, that's how inhumane NATO is. So the Iranians, in order to create deterrence, are saying, okay, we've had patience, and now we're going to hit back. So they carried out limited strikes on Kuwait to tell them that this is really going to happen if you don't change course. And from my understanding, if they don't change course, the Iranians will strike much more heavily at critical infrastructure.
Yesterday, we had multiple reports from the Strait of Hormuz. Some of these tankers were hit by mines. Some of them were hit by drones and missiles from Iran. And the strait is becoming somehow the graveyard of these tankers that are trying to, you know, to pass through the Strait of Hormuz without having the permission. And what is the situation? What do we know about the strait, and how many tankers or ships are passing through these days?
Well, basically, what the Americans did during the MOU, except for when they initially they lifted the siege, was that they violated all of their commitments, every single one. Whether it was Lebanon, whether it was releasing stolen assets, whether it was stop threatening leaders, they expanded the sanctions regime. All of these were violations, and so then they went and what they wanted to do was through the MOU take control over the Strait of Hormuz in violation of the deal, and then refrain from carrying out their commitments and strangle Iran. That was basically their objective. What they couldn't achieve through war, what they couldn't achieve through siege, they wanted to achieve through deceit. But the Iranians weren't foolish. The Iranians, as soon as they saw the Americans and these regimes in the Persian Gulf create that southern that corridor to the south, the Iranians warned them and then warned them again and then struck those tankers. So Iran is not going to allow the Strait of Hormuz to be controlled by the United States. Even if the United States creates a beachhead in Iranian territory alongside the Strait of Hormuz, Iran will still keep it closed, because we're not living in the 20th century anymore. The Iranians can fire missiles from hundreds, if not well over 1,000 kilometers away from the Strait of Hormuz and do whatever needs to be done. The Americans seem to think that if they take the shores, that then it's over. No, nothing is over. The only thing that will change is that the soldiers that are alongside the Iranian shore, they're new targets for Iran, very close to home, and much more easy to deal with. So the Strait of Hormuz will remain under Iranian control. The Iranians have been very clear about that this is not going to change at any point in the future.
I think the case of the MOU and negotiations, is there any sort of discussions within the Iranian society about if the United States, let's assume Donald Trump comes tomorrow or in 2 hours, says, I'm done with this, I'm going to announce again the ceasefire, I'm going to get back to the negotiations, what would be the reaction from Iranians? If
I've been told that the Iranian demands will be more than what was in the MOU, and that the Iranians will demand immediate results before they alleviate the pain. So my understanding is that Iranian demands with regards to regional issues will grow. The siege on Yemen, for example, could be one area where Iran makes new demands, and of course Gaza. So we'll have to see. I don't think anyone has spoken in detail about this sort of thing, but the MOU is not going to be enough anymore. The Americans have made the critical mistake of trying to undermine the MOU, and now what they will get in response is a more at some point a more humiliating MOU, and an MOU where the Iran where the Iranians will demand immediate um, implementation. This is, of course, they haven't said anything specific. The Iranians have not said anything in public or made any public declaration. But it's clear from what I hear from people and from what we're hearing in the public sphere that that's where things are going.
Many people are asking, since this is the question of many people around the world, is they're asking, why is Iran not attacking Israel as a part of the war? What is happening? What is the main reason behind this? And what is the main focus of Iran at this particular moment, at this level of the war between the two sides?
I think there are two things here. One is that this battle is about the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran wants to keep its focus on the Strait of Hormuz because if Iran wins this battle, and it will, Israel loses. The big I mean, all this war, the United States using Turkey and uh, Jordan and Syria and Kuwait and all these countries in one form or another, Saudi Arabia, against Iran, all of this is about Israel. It's about nothing, nothing else but Israel. That is the top priority for the United States. I mean, of course, it's hegemony and all that, but Israel in this region is the top priority for the United States. It's made huge sacrifices for the sake of this Zionist regime. So that is one issue. The second issue, I think, and this is just my personal, no, this is not official Iranian policy, but the Iranians want Netanyahu to start something, not for Iran to start. Why? Because Netanyahu, if he starts a war with Iran, Iran will start hitting back very hard. Now, it will be much harder than last time, from what I've been told. But it will be costly for him in the elections. But if Iran initiates strikes against the Israeli regime, it could cause Netanyahu's status to and be enhanced in Israeli society. That is my guess. Let's say that's my understanding. I think it's they want to see Netanyahu in trouble. They want to make this election process that I think is going to take place in a couple of months before the U.S. midterm elections. I think the Iranians want to make it as painful as possible for internal Israeli politics. So if Netanyahu starts something, Iran will make him regret it, and it will hurt him and his coalition in the election. Not that his opponents are any better than him; they're all genocidal maniacs. But in any case, his defeat weakens the Israeli position right now in the region. So I think that's more or less it. But also the focus is on the Strait of Hormuz. Right now, the battle is over who controls the strait. Because the Americans know that if the Iranians control the strait, they have to adhere to the demands of the MOU or the MOU plus that will come later. If they gain the Strait of Hormuz, then the United States will not comply by anything. So this is for Iran the number one issue.
J.D. Vance, in his latest interview or podcast with Joe Rogan, mentioned that there are two forces in Iran, totally different. One of them is pragmatic, the other one is radical. And the pragmatic part wants to make a deal with us. And the reason that we're fighting, because those radicals are attacking the tankers in the region. And so putting the whole MOU, destroying the whole MOU and the agreement between the United States and Iran, it wasn't he wasn't, Joe Rogan didn't push back on him and mentioning the clause, the paragraph 5 of the MOU. But after all, this is the perception, this is the way they want to to describe the situation between the United States and Iran. They want this way to be understood on the part of people in the United States. This is the official rhetoric, the official narrative on their part. When it comes to the Iranian government and the decision makers in Iran, how much of what he has said is based on the reality in Iran?
But you're absolutely correct that I mean, he tried to say, well, Iran just started hitting tankers out of the blue, which is complete nonsense. Article 5 is clear. Iran controls the strait. Iran normalizes trade through the strait, and the United States undermined that. And the Iranians gave many warnings, and the tankers belong to those countries that right now are assisting the United States in this war and have been in the past. And they know, and the Iranians warned them not to use the U.S. corridor. And they did it for days, and then until finally Iran said enough is enough. And it's not only, so it was the Americans who violated the deal, but it's not the only violation. As I said, the Americans violated all the different elements in the deal, threatening Iranian leaders, not forcing the Israeli regime to retreat, and expanding the sanctions regime, reversing the lifting of the sanctions on the Iranian oil exports, refusing from turning over Iranian stolen assets, and so on. So obviously what Vance is saying is nonsense. But this claim made by Vance is also a repetition of what they were saying during the 40-day war, the Ramadan war. If you recall that back then they were saying it's unclear who's in charge and who. That's all nonsense. The armed forces, whether it's the army or the Revolutionary Guards, the different branches of the armed forces, have no authority to carry out any operation without the consent or without the orders coming from the Supreme National Security Council. And the Supreme National Security Council, whatever decision it makes, has to have the approval of the leader. So if the army or the guards fire a single bullet, they have to have permission for that. So this is basically they have to have a mandate. So that's nonsense. The Iranians showed patience. The Americans were dishonest, as expected. They violated all of their commitments. Then they tried to undermine Iran's authority that they accepted in the MOU, and the Iranians blocked it. And then the Americans waged the war. So, why are they bombing bridges? Why are they bombing hospitals? Why are they bombing desalination plants? Why are the Americans bombing tunnels for ordinary people are using? What does that have to do with a handful of tankers? And also, the Americans bombed an Iranian tanker twice. They bombed it again, I think, yesterday on one of Iran's tankers. That was not even near the Strait of Hormuz. It was, I think, near Khark Island, which is to the north of the. It was actually moving away from the Strait of Hormuz, deep inside to the north of the Persian Gulf. The ships that Iran struck were those passing through the strait without permission, without consent, in violation of Article 5. Ships that countries in the Persian Gulf owned, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and I think maybe Kuwait. So again, that's all nonsense. That's propaganda put out there to justify their position. But what Vance said, Nima, I think there was a lot of. I said that I think there were some important things there. I think Vance is trying to distance himself from Trump and trying to present himself as someone who doesn't want war. But he also implied that the Israelis are against him, that the Zionist lobby is against him, that they're trying to depict him as an anti-Semite. So now it's becoming, in order to make yourself popular, you have to say that the Israelis are out to get me. That, I think, is important. I'm not saying that he's going to do anything fruitful. He's going to be of any use. He's, and when he speaks about the Iranians, the hardliners, and that's basically he's trying to keep within the boundaries of Trump's narrative, but also distance himself, and also make himself more popular by saying these, these Zionists, these paid people um, are trying to discredit me because I want peace. But also in addition to that, you see the defense budget being blocked uh, by the Democrats. You see roughly half of the Democrats opposing the annual military support for the Israeli regime. Things are changing in the United States. Things are changing. It's not because the Democrats are any better than the Republicans. It's because the people have changed. Americans have woken up. Jews, Christians, Muslims, they're waking up. And in the Democratic, among Democrat supporters, independents, it's more rapid than among Republicans, but even there, it's changing too. So this, I think, is going to make it much more difficult for Trump to sustain a war with Iran, especially if Iran begins to increase the pain. When the markets close, and I hate doing this, but right before the markets close, I checked the price of oil, and it was going up, and it's nearing $90. I think that if this continues next week, it will go much higher, or significantly higher, especially if Iran does escalate. Then it could go very high, very fast. And many people have said this on your show before. I've said it before. The shortages have not gone away. The 4 months of war and siege, they've created huge shortages. The brief period when the Strait of Hormuz was open did not compensate at all for the shortages, especially, in some respects, uh, they were able to take more oil from the Persian Gulf compared to other products. But so the shortages of other uh, goods are even worse than they were when the MOU was signed. With regards to oil, I think now it's probably worse than then, because whatever gains they made over the whatever extra oil they were able to extract from the Persian Gulf, that has been canceled, more than canceled, by the fact that over the past week the strait has been literally shut.
Do you see any scenario under which the superpowers or important countries like China and Russia, or maybe other regional countries, maybe Pakistan, doing something? Because there we have received some reports that Pakistan is trying to communicate with Iranians. They're sending, as time goes by and these attacks are happening, the Trump administration, on the other hand, is sending some sort of messages to Iranians. And how do you see that? The communication, and the other one is the participation or some sort of role of other countries, important countries in the region, which we know, for example, China and Russia, they have good relationship with Iran, with GCC countries as well. That could be influential. But on the other hand, you see this hostility continuing in Ukraine between Russia and the United States. There is no solution in in Ukraine right now. Basically, everything is on the battlefield, fighting each other. And is that going to be the case in the West Asia between Iran and the United States, or do you, the situation is somehow different because of the importance of the Strait of Hormuz?
At the moment, I don't see anything happening. I'm sure messages are going back and forth between Iran and the United States. I mean, it's been going on for the 47 years. So that's normal. But I don't see how a third party is going to change anything. At the end of the day, it's the United States that has to make a decision. If anything, the countries that are hosting US bases have more influence over the United States than anyone else. They are the ones, the regimes in Kuwait and Bahrain and Qatar and so on, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and Oman. They're the ones who have to put pressure on the United States to bring an end to this, unless they want this to continue. If they want to see this continue, they're going to pay a very heavy price. They may pay the ultimate price. But I don't see how anyone else can do anything. I mean, the Pakistanis, they were mediators. Basically, they passed messages back and forth. It wasn't as if they were playing some extraordinary role, or Qatar or Oman or anyone else. They're all close to the United States. All of these governments are close to the United States, uh, whether it's Turkey or Egypt or the Emirates or um, Pakistan. They're all in the American camp. Uh, but if they want to play a role in passing in messages back and forth, that's possible. But unless the United States changes its policy, I don't see anything happening, anything positive happening in the days and weeks ahead. But again, I think that the only countries that could put pressure on the United States are the countries that are assisting the United States in this war. They're the ones who can tell the United States that, look, if they collectively sit down and say and put out give a message to the United States that we don't want this war anymore, and we're not going to cooperate, then it becomes almost impossible for the Americans to continue. But we haven't seen that yet.
Yeah. It means that the communications between Iran and Qatar, between Iran and Saudi Arabia, what do we know about that? There were some sort of talks between the two sides. I don't know how much leverage do they have, how much sovereignty do they have, because on one side they're trying to talk with Iranians. They're not happy with the war. We know that. They were talking about it in their media, in their political system. They were talking about that, the war in the Strait of Hormuz is destroying their economy, is not good for Qatar. Qatar doesn't have access to the, Saudi Arabia has that pipeline going, to the Red Sea. But after all, the whole case, it doesn't make any sort of sense for GCC countries, militarily, economically, whatever you can, whatever name you give it, to this sort of situation they're in. And what is that? What is the perception on the part of Iran? And on one side, they're trying to say we're not part of the war. On the other hand, cooperating with the United States, using their own tankers in the Strait of Hormuz to be hit by missiles or
Yeah,
mines.
for anyone to claim that they are neutral is just bizarre, and it's ridiculous, and no sane person accepts that logic. And if you ever see any expert say that online, you can be sure that he's on the payroll. There's no doubt about it. It's like, would anyone accept if the Russians opened up some bases in France and in Germany and started firing missiles at the UK? Then France and Germany saying, "Well, sorry, it's none of our business. Don't strike back at us. You have no right to strike us. We don't have control over those bases or our airspace." No one is going to accept that. So if you ever see any so-called expert make this take this stance online, you know that they're being either paid by Saudi Arabia or by Qatar or by the Emirates, or someone's paying them. All of them have direct communications with Iran. Every single one. Iran has political ties with all of them, and Iran is in daily communication with all of them. But at the end of the day, the only thing that's important for Iran is its security. They can say whatever they want. The Qataris can say whatever they want. But if U.S. bases in the Persian Gulf region are being used against Iran, that's the only thing that counts. And so, for example, Kuwait can say all it wants, that this is between you and the Americans, but Iranians are being killed, murdered, and Iranian infrastructure, civilian infrastructure, is being destroyed through Kuwait. So there's not a chance in the world. So first, the Iranians struck back at U.S. bases in Kuwait. But then, when they saw it didn't stop, now they're starting to retaliate against the Kuwaiti regime. So if they want to remain in power, if they want their countries to remain intact, their only option is to bring an end to this. And Saudi Arabia isn't any better off than the other ones. They have a pipeline to the Red Sea, sure, but Iran can destroy Saudi oil installations and make that pipeline useless in a day. It's not difficult for Iran. I read an article about pipelines and how this is going to make things difficult for Iran in the future? No, it won't. You can't move the oil fields. You can't move the gas fields. That's what's important. The pipelines can go wherever they want to take. They can spend tens of billions of dollars making pipelines, and then if the Americans start a war again using their countries, the Iranians will destroy uh, those oil fields and gas fields, and the pipelines will be useless. It will just have been tens of billions of dollars wasted for nothing. So Iran is not going to accept the United States using the Persian Gulf region to kill Iranians. And it won't be allowed now, and it won't be allowed 5 years from now. That era is over. And there's nothing that these regimes can do about it. With or without pipelines, nothing will change. They'll lose. So they have to make a decision. Do they want their regimes to remain intact? Then they have to stop the war. If they want to continue gambling the house, they'll lose the house.
I assume that we know that Azerbaijan has, they're cooperating with Israel, with the United States. I don't know, in the eyes of these attacks in Iraqi Kurdistan, what is the concern on the part of Azerbaijan, and what is the communication between Iranian government and Azerbaijan? We know that they're talking to each other, and they understand the Iranian position, and it's not just about the two governments. The cultural ties between the two are so deep, in my opinion. And what is your understanding of that?
Well, the public in the Republic of Azerbaijan is very close to Iran. And it's only through a dictatorship that they can keep control over the people. But right now, I don't think they're doing much against Iran, at least overtly. During the 12-day war and during the Ramadan war, the 40 days of fighting 4 months ago, they were assisting our enemies. But now, since the airstrikes are limited to the south and the Israeli regime is not directly involved, our borders with the Republic of Azerbaijan are quiet. So, of course, they continue to collaborate with the Israeli regime. They send oil. Aliyev and Erdogan, are business partners with Netanyahu. And they continue to be business partners, and they assist the Israeli regime that way. Erdogan has helped the Israeli regime throughout the genocide, and so has Aliyev. But with regards to collaborating to strike Iranian territory, that I have not heard of during the recent fighting. I don't think they've done anything that would constitute a direct military assistance to the enemy.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Marandi. As I was just watching one of the footages from Jordan. It means that the attacks are happening in Soleimani in Iraq. The fire is going on right now, and the two attacks, at least two targets were hit directly in Jordan. The footage just came out, and the war is going on.
Nima, in the Kurdish areas in Iraq, you see all these bases being attacked. Does anyone in their right mind believe that the local Kurdish authorities did not know of these bases? All these underground, all these weapons depots. We saw one that explode yesterday near. So the government in Erbil allowed these terrorists to develop all these military bases and to create all these ammunition depots, huge ammunition depots, very close to towns and cities, threatening the civilian population of northern Iraq. And so they allowed them to do this. No one can say that they did not know. They are fully informed of what's happening. And they too, if they continue down this road, will pay the price. They will pay the price. Iran will not allow that local government to exist anymore if they continue behaving this way. Iran will work with the Iraqi central government to change the status quo and to even change the constitution so that this will never happen again. So if it's these countries are working, these entities, these countries in the Persian Gulf, and Jordan, they're working for the United States. They're working to promote the interests of the United States. And the Kurdish local government in northern Iraq is doing the same. They're working for the Israelis and the United States against their own interests. They bet on the wrong horse, as they say in the West. And they thought that Iran would lose, and so did Aliyev, and so did, I suppose, Erdogan, and so did the regimes in the Persian Gulf. And they didn't lose. And Iran didn't lose, nor did the Axis of Resistance. Instead of helping the Americans and the Israelis, these regimes should turn and think about their own security and what the Americans and the Israelis would do to them if they did actually win. If the United States and the Israelis had defeated the Axis of Resistance and the Islamic Republic of Iran, imagine what the situation would be today in Turkey, in Jordan, in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, in Syria. The Israeli regime and Trump would be dictating terms. But instead of coming to their senses, they continue to collaborate with the empire.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thank you for having me.